Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Strength and Hormones podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode. I'm joined by Ramona, and Ramona is our very own practitioner at Functional Fueling. And so we're going to be talking all about how to navigate the holiday season, hopefully providing you tips for this time of year, both Thanksgiving, whatever holiday you celebrate in December, January, beyond, and really giving you practical strategies of what to do, what not to do, and what we can really optimize during this time of year. So, Ramona, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
I know. This has been a long time coming. I feel like we've needed to do a podcast for a while.
I know.
Here we are.
I'm so excited to be here, and the holiday season is my absolute favorite.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a really good conversation today.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I want to start off, since this episode is going to be really right in time for Thanksgiving. Just kind of tell us, like, what are your top 3 favorite Thanksgiving recipes?
Yeah, so my family has never been super into traditional Thanksgiving foods, but we definitely have our favorites. So my mom makes one of the best butternut squash soups that I've ever had. And so that's always a really nice appetizer for us. You can make it for a ton of people. You can make it ahead of time, freeze it for Christmas. But I find it a really nice way to start off your meal with something nice and warming, helping with digestion, and then also kind of gets you away from some of those heavier dips and spreads and things like that, where it feels like you could just not stop eating it and then you're not even hungry for the main meal. But that's definitely one of my favorites. I also like, so some of us are not eating gluten, so we make maybe something like a wild rice stuffing as opposed to a bread-based stuffing. It's just such a nice hearty way to still get that carb fix, but with a little bit more antioxidants, a little bit more protein in that wild rice instead of a bread option. You can pack some veggies in there, some nuts and things of that sort. And then another one of my favorites is roasted squash instead of something like a potato or candied yams. I don't know if people still eat those, but like a delicata squash, make them into little thin rings, roast it in the oven. You can get some great fiber by eating the skin of the squash too, if you clean it well. And then top it with some pumpkin seeds, a little balsamic, pomegranate seeds, some parsley, and it looks so nice, so festive, and it's really good. So those are some of my favorites. What about you?
Those are some really great tips. I'll have to try that squash idea.
Yeah.
I love
so
squash
good.
this time of year. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I'm just such a whole chicken / whole turkey fan. And it's one of my favorite things to cook and eat. And I love to cook it with like extra bone broth so that it doesn't dry out, because turkeys can tend to do that. And then just baste it with like all of the different spices and dried herbs and things. So I would say whole turkey is probably one of my absolute favorites. Outside of that, I like to do kind of more of like a festive salad type dish. So I do just a bunch of different chopped veggies and herbs, mix it together, and then do a bunch of olive oil. I think balsamic is very festive this time of year too. Casandrinos, who is one of our affiliates that I get, the only place I get my olive oil from, but they also have really amazing vinegars, and they're kind of like glazes. So they're a little bit thicker, but they don't have all of the cardia ingredients like the glazes do at the store. And so I love to use that. And that would be a great option to use like on top of the squash you mentioned too. But for any of the more like holiday type salads as a base. And then I love making a healthier version of a pumpkin pie. And I've fed it to so many people, and no one ever knows that it has any health power in it whatsoever. But there's so many different recipes out there for different types of, pumpkin pie alternatives, depending on what you're looking for. But you can make a really nice one with like an almond / coconut flour crust, and then using canned pumpkin. Canned pumpkin has so much good fiber and beta carotene, which is so good for us. And then using like a canned coconut milk as opposed to using like a heavy cream type option. So those are probably my top 3 favorites.
I love that. I'm going to have to check out the Casandrinos. Did you say they're vinegars?
Yeah, they're called their vinegars. I love their spices too. That's like one of my favorite spices, use their Zeus seasoning. But I think it's just on their website under vinegars. But they actually are like thicker than regular vinegar. It's more of like a glaze.
That sounds so good. That would be a good gift as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. My mom always gifts them because I've got her hooked on it. So she always gifts it to people. And they have like holiday gift sets too, which is really cool.
All right. You heard it here first. Do we have a code for Casandrinos as well?
Yeah. It's Functional Fueling RD. We'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Love that. Can't wait. Okay. Moving on. Lauren, with this holiday season, how do you beat constipation and bloating with travel, maybe some new nutrition patterns,
Yeah.
eating foods that we might not normally eat. How do you combat that bloating and constipation?
Yeah, I think this is a big issue that people struggle with for all the reasons that you mentioned. And so, first and foremost, I think like work with the low hanging fruit and try to not have as much variability within your hydration and your food intake, right? So, our body is all one big clock. And we have a previous episode where we talked about the role of circadian rhythm as it relates to hormones, but our circadian rhythm also influences digestion and motility. So, one of the big issues that comes up during this time of year is just different timing of when you're eating, probably a lot more like snacking on things in between meals as well. So just trying to stick to consistent meal times as you would normally can be really powerful for your digestion. I would also try to incorporate good fibers as many times as you can. If you're traveling, then what are some things that you can pack with you or that you can maybe Instacart to the hotel or wherever you're staying so that you have some quick and easy options on hand. Outside of that, really making sure that we're getting an adequate hydration. And by that, I don't just mean water, but also ensuring you're getting in electrolytes. If you are traveling, generally there's going to be a higher risk of dehydration. If you're in like a very cold climate, that can also increase risk of dehydration. So making sure that you have some electrolyte options on hand and especially potassium. We talked about in a pretty recent blog post about the role of potassium, especially in the luteal phase. But this is really important because you're more prone to constipation, not the week before you start your period, but really like the time period before that. And you're more prone to like bloating and water retention as well. So, upping your potassium intake can be something really helpful. Maybe doing like an electrolyte packet that's a little bit more potassium rich can be super powerful. And then I'd also look at bringing some supplemental items with you. Start very slow with these because many of them can kind of go to the reverse side, right? But things you might consider would be aloe vera. They do sell them as blister packs, which means that they're in travel size packs. Many people are familiar with like aloe vera liquid, but you can actually get it in encapsulated form too. That's a natural laxative, so that can be a really great option to incorporate. Magnesium citrate can also be something really easy to travel with, whether it's capsules or a powder. A lot of times you can buy them as like individual packets. You can also buy individual sun fiber packets online too. I know Amazon has them, and they're just something you could add into like a beverage that you're doing each night. And that's just a great way to get a little bit of very like low, very like safe from like bloat free issues, but gives you a little bit more fiber as well to help with things. And then also, if you want to explore it, castor oil packs can be a really great option to help stimulate bowel flow, which helps to be able to facilitate a bowel movement. And you can travel with them. They're really easy to set up. And so if you are open to it, it's something you could definitely bring with you on your trip. And I would, again, with any of these things, I would start with like once per day or once every couple of days maximum, and then increase your frequency because some of them, if you're sensitive, can cause you to go to the other side of things.
Yeah, we don't need to do everything at once.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Something I think comes up for a lot of people this time of year is offending others with what decisions you choose to make, whether it's that you choose to not to go somewhere with someone because you want to get a workout in or because you don't want to eat something that someone else made. And a lot of times we find ourselves just self-sabotaging to make other people happy, but ultimately it ends up hurting you in the long run because either you've kind of disappointed yourself, you don't feel well because you ate something that doesn't sit well with you, or it's just that you have learned that you maybe need to stand up for yourself more. So how can we work on our ability to not worry, or how can we maybe even change the conversation around how to not offend others?
I think this is such an important conversation that we could probably have an entire podcast about, just because, as you mentioned, this can take so many different forms and there can be so many different ways that other people are coming at you as it relates to this conversation. But I think specifically within food choices, I'm always an advocate for going in with kindness. And then if you can deflect the conversation as best as possible. So, maybe someone's questioning, oh, why didn't you try my dish? Maybe it's something that you genuinely don't want, or, something that you can say, oh, hey, there've been so many wonderful dishes here. Once I finish this plate, I'll be sure to circle back around if I still have room. There's always ways to kind of approach it first with flattery, because sometimes people just want the recognition of why didn't you try my thing? Like what I made is really good, or I put a lot of effort into it. So there's different ways to still appreciate it, or even just to completely ignore and say like, Auntie, it's so good to see you again. Like, I love your shoes, anything to deflect the conversation. So I think deflection is always my first go-to. But I was actually having a conversation with a family member about this because they have a different family dynamic with their extended family. And one thing that I thought was really valuable that she had mentioned was, you know, when you are traveling, going to maybe a completely different part of the country where just the food environment looks totally different, she likes going to different health food stores and getting a better understanding of what is available to you out there, because what health looks like to different people is completely different, right? So for her, she gets a better understanding of where that side of her family is coming from by going to their health food stores, by seeing what local options there are. And then maybe it's a matter of you contributing your own dish to the family meal. They have had people come to them and say, oh, I don't know what you're going to eat because we don't eat what you eat over there. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, don't worry about it. I can take care of myself. That's totally fine. So I think there's so many different ways where, you know, you can either just take care of yourself or kind of approach it with saying something along the lines of, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate your care and consideration. Don't worry about it. I can handle it. Or something that's going to help deflect, but also show your appreciation and show some kindness too, because I think that's usually what might be missing in that conversation. So I think you can diffuse it first before even deflecting, so it doesn't come off as passive aggressive. But I know it's a very sticky situation for a lot of people. There are cultural considerations too, where some people really might not feel comfortable refusing, you know, whatever that is. So I recognize that this could be a much longer conversation.
Yeah. And I think, though, that what you're saying is that there's ways to still honor your needs first and foremost. And if you can, that would be the route we would encourage you to take, because ultimately you're the one that has to live in your body for the rest of your life. You're the one that has to deal with the consequences of what you've done, of what you've eaten, or what, you know, what decisions you've made and things. So I think practice really honestly makes perfect here. And if you can start with maybe your first holiday situation and, you know, continue to really strengthen that muscle, it's only going to get easier with time. I know I can speak firsthand for my own self that really is how things have worked over the years.
Yeah, and it sounds lame, but practicing having those conversations, because the more you say it, the easier it gets. So practice. Imagine, role play, talk to yourself in the mirror in terms of how you might go about having that conversation with someone. Yeah. Whether it's family or friends.
And if you need a script, we have exact play-by-play scripts for you in our holiday guide.
Love it.
So we're going to put the link to that to be able to download it. It's totally free. And we have a whole section that's just around this topic itself.
I love that. I'm happy that we're providing people with that. So definitely check it out, whether you're someone who has to deal with this or even to help a friend who might have to navigate these conversations. If we're not even directly impacted by it, we definitely know someone who is. So especially during the holiday season.
Yeah.
So Lauren, why don't you tell us a little bit more about, especially around the holidays, right, the importance of blood sugar control for these holiday meals, not fasting. How do you prepare for these holiday meals specifically as it relates to blood sugar balance?
Yeah. So there's so many different ways that even with unhealthier food ingredients, you can still focus on how you can balance your blood sugar. And we'll get into this a little bit more in this episode, but really having stable blood sugar around these meals where there is more highly palatable foods is one of the keys to feeling normalized and not noticing big ebbs and flows in your energy level, not noticing hormonal changes happen from many days of eating hyperglycemic and like insulin spiking foods. So really focusing on how we can balance our blood sugar. If nothing else, if you can't change the ingredients, that's going to be one of the key things. I know that's always what I default back to in these types of situations. So for example, say that there are very little healthy ingredients that are available, or, you know, maybe it's not what your typical would look like, but there still is some type of protein. Hopefully it's not fried. Maybe it's something that's, you know, the turkey we're talking about, right? And then say that the only option is mashed potatoes or some type of heavy casserole. and then maybe there is only green beans, but they have a bunch of, different types of toppings and things on them. Well, we can still make that blood sugar balanced by making sure that that meal still has adequate amounts of turkey, that we're having a protein source, because protein helps to be able to stabilize the blood sugar response. It helps to be able to stabilize the insulin response to that meal. And then we can take those mashed potatoes or whatever type of starchy, heavier option it is. Maybe we know that they're not the healthiest thing in the world. Maybe they have a lot of added ingredients we wouldn't normally eat, but we can still keep them within a relative portion size of what would create a stable blood sugar response alongside of that turkey. So I was actually having this conversation with a client the other day of like almost thinking it, I know this is like very kindergarten sounding, but like almost think of it as popsicle sticks. So like turkey is one popsicle stick, vegetables are another popsicle stick, and then your starchy food like your mashed potatoes are another popsicle stick. So for every popsicle stick coming from like a mashed potato or starch, we need to have at least one popsicle stick balancing it out on the other side. Okay. So if we're going to have a plate of mashed potatoes, like we need to have something like protein, vegetables alongside of it. We should always be in a situation where there's more popsicle sticks on the protein and vegetable side than there is on the starch side. And that's going to create the most stable blood sugar balance. So if you are having mashed potatoes, maybe the portion size is no bigger than the palm of your hand. That's a really good reference range that you can use for a very stable blood sugar response to that meal. And so when we're talking about the palm of your hand, you're looking at like the full diameter of your palm. So look at your palm flat on. That's about the size of what the mound should be. Turn your hand to the side, and that's about the thickness of what it should be. And then try to do your best with whatever vegetable options are available. If they do have a lot of added components to them, then maybe you don't do as large of a portion size as you would normally do, but that way you're still able to get in some of the fiber, some of the antioxidants, but we're not also contributing like additional carbohydrate on top of the mashed potatoes. So that can just be like a very easy practice to consider. Another thing we really want to try to make sure of is that we're not fasting or going to these meals hungry. This is a big mistake I know I made as a little kid because I didn't know any of this, of course, nor I feel like should I at this point. But, it's like trying to kind of save up. Like, oh my God, I know that we're going to have dinner and it's going to be so tasty. I'm just not going to eat all day so that I have all this room in my stomach. But then what does that do? It creates a unstable blood sugar response. So when you get to this meal, not only do you overeat, but you also are not going to make the most intentional and wise decisions for yourself. And then you're going to feel probably pretty sick after you've eaten it. Then you're going to wake up the next morning. It's going to completely dysregulate your hunger cues. And then the next day is also going to be shot because now you're trying to pick up the pieces of the damage that was done the day before. And really, when it comes to nutrition, health, any of these things, right, it's all about stacking blocks. And so instead of looking at it as like, how is this one holiday meal going to fail me? Instead, how can we look at it as like, how can I make my day look almost identical to what it would normally look like? And that way it doesn't trickle down into multiple days following that meal. That's really where you're going to see the most change happen. So really trying to avoid fasting and then also really trying to avoid getting into these meals. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being ravenous, no higher than a 7. If you're going into these meals and you are at a 7 or an 8 and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so hungry, there's going to be some bad decisions that we're probably going to make, right? And it's because your blood sugar is low and your body's physiologically in a vulnerable state.
Totally agree. And think about it too. You're going and you're probably going to have appetizers first, and then you might not have dinner for an hour or two after you get there. So even if you're going there not super hungry, you're still allowing yourself time for that hunger to develop once you start smelling the smells of the food cooking, that's stimulating digestive enzyme release, stomach acid secretion. So you're really priming your digestion so much better, even if you think like, oh, well, I don't want to go when I'm full. You don't need to go when you're full, just not when you're ravenously hungry. So I think that's so valuable. And I know that I've also felt the repercussions of going ravenous and then you fill up on chips and salsa.
Exactly.
For example, maybe not during the holidays, but.
And we don't want to be eating that much starch first, right? Because then that's going to create a negative blood sugar response.
Exactly. Exactly.
I love it. Okay, so let's kind of game plan of what this would look like based off of what we just talked about with like not going in fasting and not having a erratic blood sugar response. So walk us through an example of how to set up a day if someone was having, say, like a holiday brunch at, let's say, like 10 or 11 a.m.
Yeah. So first and foremost, when it comes to, we've mentioned circadian rhythms, that sort of thing, if we can keep our waking time consistent, at least within an hour of what you're normally sleep and wake, right? That's going to be really helpful to help set your circadian rhythms. We know that our digestive enzyme secretion, all those digestive hormones that are involved in that too, those also run on circadian rhythms, right? So by waking up consistently, you're at least not throwing that off, right? And the success for me personally, and I think for a lot of individuals that I work with too, is in the preparation. So for a morning time event, you really want to think about, how can I prep the night before, the day before? Am I well hydrated? Especially if this is a brunch that's going to involve some alcohol, which I know we'll touch on in a couple different conversations here today, but really making sure that you're well hydrated. Maybe that's having some electrolytes instead of water, how you were mentioning that, just to really help ensure that you're going in hydrated. Because if your event is at 10, let's say you're waking up at 8, we don't want to be chugging water all morning, right? So hydration is going to be a really important piece of that. And then consistent wake up time. Following that wake up time, can you start hydrating effectively, just so we can have that primer of hydration going into whatever that meal brunch is going to look like. Sometimes if your meal is 10 or 11 and you're still waking up at a consistent wake time, let's just say 7 o'clock, you might benefit from having some type of snack, a protein forward, whether it's a snack or a mini meal, something along those lines, right? That's going to help prime your blood sugar response so that you're not kind of similar to how you were describing fasting all day. That window is going to be shorter, right? But it's a similar concept. We don't want to be fasting all day. We still want to support your circadian rhythms, support your thyroid hormone production, have that snack within 30 minutes to an hour or so of waking up. Maybe you can fit in a workout or a morning walk, something that's also going to help improve your insulin sensitivity leading into that meal is going to be really helpful for on that front end, making sure that you're prepped for maybe something that is going to look a little bit different in terms of your eating patterns. And then once you're at brunch, making sure that we're not just starting things off with a mimosa or a sugary drink. Can we start with water? Can we start with sparkling water? Something that's not going to have that high sugar content. Maybe you save that drink if you do want to have it until after you've eaten a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat. Maybe it's some eggs, sausage. You want to go for an option that is going to have protein. The same meal composition strategies are still in place for something like brunch. So you want to definitely make sure that you're having appropriate protein before you go to any pastries, fruits, any kind of those more carb-rich options, which certainly can have a role, right, in your holiday meal and your holiday brunch. But the same focus goes in terms of having those significant portions of your protein options before you have your carbohydrates. And then afterwards, if you can go on a walk around an hour or so after your meal, that's another way that we can help support your blood sugar balance as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Such great tips.
So Lauren, what about if we've already kind of talked about this, but walk me through your day and how you would prep for an evening event.
Yeah. So similar to a lot of things that you mentioned, but obviously with this, we want to make sure that we for sure have had a meal or 2 or 3, possibly before this type of situation. So for me, I would definitely start off the day with a strength training workout, because we know that with strength training, with resistance training, you're going to have a greater insulin sensitivity for about 24 hours after that workout. And if I know that that meal is going to be a little bit more carb dense, then I'm going to try to work with that natural physiological adaptation that we can create, right, by doing resistance training in the morning time. So I would definitely, wake up, have a snack, hydrate, do my resistance training workout, and then have a meal afterwards. And so I would keep it honestly very similar to what I would normally eat on a day-to-day basis. I share with you guys all the times that I love to do like a very functionally packed smoothie at breakfast and throw my functional fuel pro and my hormone potion and like veggies and fruit and berries and all the things in there. So I would have that for breakfast. breakfast or maybe something really similar. Maybe if I want to do like a quiche or something, but it would definitely be very protein, vegetable, and probably fruit based as just the start of the day. And then I would eat my next meal about 4 hours after, like I normally would. So I would have my lunch, and my lunch would look very similar to what it normally does. And, generally that's going to be some type of like mixed vegetable salad and some type of legume or fiber rich starch option. Legumes really kind of are my go-to, so I won't really give you any other options because let's be honest, I'm probably not going to eat them. But whatever my availability is there, and then a protein option, of course. So maybe that's like a bone-in chicken and then olive oil and such on top of that. And then say this meal is at like 6 p.m. Generally, I would always have a midday snack somewhere around like 4 p.m. is kind of like how I set up my day. So I would either have that midday snack around 4 p.m. or what I might do is I might also push it a little bit closer to 6 p.m. if I'm like not super hungry at 4. One of the things I love to do is like an hour before I know this meal is going to be, I like to have something that's very protein and fiber forward to just help bring down that hunger level from like a 7 down to a 5. And sometimes I'll even do this like while I'm getting ready, or if I'm like in an Uber, like on the Uber ride over there. And you can do this even while you're traveling. Like you can Instacart or you can run to a local Whole Foods and you can grab, some chia seeds and make a chia seed pudding with yogurt. Or you could grab a protein shake, like one of the ready to drink options that's in the fridge, grab that and have that alongside of some berries or some raw veggies, and have that like an hour before you're going to have this meal. And you will find that you are not going to need those appetizers and such. And you're going to be able to make such a more, healthful, decision for yourself when you get to that meal. And then 6 p.m. is a little bit earlier than I would naturally eat dinner. So honestly, I would probably still have a snack after that, just to keep things really regular with how I would normally eat. And that's going to really be critical because my goal is not going to be to overeat at that meal. So even though I know it's going to be delicious and, it's going to be a different meal than I would normally have, I'm still going to try to get to the same fullness level that I would normally get to at a dinner that I would make myself. And if I do that, then I probably will be hungry a few hours later and probably need a light snack before I go to bed. Maybe it's like a collagen hot chocolate or something that I make, right? It doesn't need to be substantial, but just something to be able to stabilize my blood sugar while I'm sleeping overnight. But I think it's really important that we're not trying to push the envelope to be more full from these meals than what our normal meals would be. Because as I mentioned earlier, that's how you're going to know that notice that ricochet effect, right? The next day, where then you wake up and you're like, I'm not hungry because you went to bed and you were so incredibly stuffed. And that then alters your hunger hormone cues the next day.
100%. I think I like what you said too about just keeping it consistent, and that way I find that before your meals, if you are going to have that snack and just pull down that hunger level a little bit, it's so much easier to not be reactive to the foods that are available. And you just can kind of stay in your right mind and be a little bit more in tune with what actually do I want versus, oh my gosh, all these things are available that are only available once a year. And even if I don't really want this, I'm going to have it because I'm not going to have it any other time of the year. It allows you that time to just take a little bit more of a pause and assess whether you actually want that or not.
So we talked a little bit about some supplements that we can use for like constipation and bloating and things. Give us a couple other tips that you would recommend, supplemental things or, things that are in the pantry that someone can do before these meals to help with digestion.
Yes. So before meals, really helpful to have some sort of digestive bitter, something that's going to help stimulate this digestive process to kind of just kickstart it a little bit. That might be simple, something that you probably already have in your pantry, like apple cider vinegar, just a couple of tablespoons and a few ounces of water. You can even make it into a nice little mocktail as you're getting ready. You have an awesome Instagram post with a nice recipe on there.
Yes.
Shameless plug. But doing something like apple cider vinegar or a little digestive bitters tincture. There's a handful of options out there. But like I said, that can just really help stimulate from that top down, that digestive process, really help getting that going, which downstream is going to help how your not only your blood sugar response to that meal, but also just how you digest and process that meal. So that's a really nice thing for beforehand. I personally really like utilizing something like ginger shots or ginger juice, regardless of what form that comes in. But I'm someone who that warming effect is really helpful for me. Other people like more of a cooling effect in using something like peppermint. So everyone's going to be individualized there, regardless of, dependent on whether you like something that's warming, something that's cooling. But ginger can really help support that stomach acid secretion as well. So that can be helpful either before meals, in between meals, things of that sort. And then also something like N-acetylcysteine or NAC, as well as glutathione, which you have a great podcast on glutathione. That's something that's great to take away from meals, but especially if you're going to be consuming alcohol, having that before your meal can really help support your liver. So glutathione, being that master antioxidant in our liver, is going to be paramount for how we're processing those toxins that are coming from alcohol and, other toxins that can come from food sources as well, environmental exposures. Maybe we're going to a family's house where they have all of the holiday candles, things of that sort, chemicals like that. Our liver has to process through those as well. So supporting that with glutathione or NAC, which is a precursor to glutathione, those are both options that can be great to take beforehand to help support your liver as well.
Yeah, I love that. And if you are traveling, then N-acetylcysteine is generally sold as capsules, whereas glutathione is sold as a liquid. So that would be a good option to have on hand for travel. Otherwise, Symbiotica actually sells like liposomal glutathione individual packets, and you can bring those with you as well. So whichever of those you prefer, but I think those are such great tips and really practical for many individuals.
Yeah, and even after the fact, after your meals, if you did want to have some activated charcoal, if something's not sitting well, if you did have some alcohol, I like keeping activated charcoal on hand just to help give a little bit of that additional support, because you don't necessarily want to take the NAC or the glutathione after your meal, after your alcohol consumption.
Definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Lauren, let's talk about navigating alcohol and, what is a safe amount to have, how to prep. I know we just mentioned some of those ways to prep for that. And then some of your favorite options that you might have or recommendations for people if they want to still enjoy and have that be part of their holiday festivities and celebrations, but how to do so in the best way possible for their health.
Yeah. So, it's always a hard conversation because we know that alcohol is not good for us in any quantity, right? And that it is technically a neurotoxin. So if you can not drink it and maybe go the mocktail route, that's always going to be the best option possible. But I will admit that I myself like a glass of red wine at a holiday meal, and other individuals might as well. And so, we're here to support you, whatever your goals or whatever your decisions are that you make for that. Now, if you are a female, then we would recommend sticking with like one drink maximum per day. That's even what like government health agencies recommend as a safe limit for what we know to be safe for women. Of course, like I said, zero is better than one, but one is really that safer upper limit, because anything above one is really when alcohol starts to act as an endocrine disruptor. And we see an increased risk of estrogen related cancers and things of that sort with greater amounts of alcohol consumption. For men, that amount is about 2 drinks per day. And you really want to stick to the daily amount rather than the weekly, because your liver can only process so much on a daily basis, right? And it's just kind of like blood sugar, but it doesn't add up everything at the end of the week and then metabolize it, right? We're metabolizing alcohol whenever we do consume it. You do want to take into account that when you are consuming alcohol, that there is going to be a decrease in your ability to metabolize fat from the meal that you are eating. So it's just something to think about, and if you're someone that is really sensitive to fat intake, you may want to look for some leaner options within that meal. Maybe instead of doing like the steak or the ribeye, maybe you do something like chicken or white fish that is a little bit lighter. So just something to consider. But you had a great tip with the N-acetylcysteine or glutathione prior. That does have some hepatoprotective properties, which just means that it protects our liver from some of the damage that alcohol does. So it's definitely something that I myself would always do prior to consumption. And then the activated charcoal or some type of binder. I really like Quicksilver's binders. You cannot do it with any food or other supplements though. So that's really important to note, is that if you do need to take a medication or if you have other supplements or things you're taking, it needs to be at least an hour away. There are some binders out there. Cellcore has like biotoxin binder that can be taken with food. So that would be a secondary option. But those can be something you can take after to help kind of like bind up that ethanol. You can also use food-based binders. They're not going to be as intensive as the supplemental binders, but food-based binders would be things that are really rich in insoluble fiber and help to really bind up your stool. So these would be things like pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, legumes, and you need to do a pretty large quantity. Like we're talking about a quarter cup of any of these. But if you don't have the option of the supplements, that could be something you could try to do after the meal to help with just providing some of that binder effect. So those are some ideas to think about when it comes to types of alcohol that you're consuming. With wine, if you are like me and you do like wine, you do need to be really careful because like, especially with California wines, like they spray them with so many herbicides and there's so much added sugar that's in those wines. And really that's what's the most readily available, even if you're not in California. Like I would say that those are probably the easiest to find and generally also the most economical. But if you can find more old world wines, so things from like Spain, Italy, France, you're going to have better quality. There's less herbicides that are used. They don't allow those things in those countries. And there also is less sugar content. You can also look for a company that does actually tell you how much is in there. So I, for many years, have bought from Scout and Cellar. They actually tell you the residual sugar content, and all of their wines have been third-party tested to not have any of these herbicide use and toxic compounds and things in them. There's also like Dry Farm Wines. There's a few other brands that do this. And if you're at the grocery store, then I would say the best option would be something like Fitvine. They also relay the sugar content on their bottles, and generally with all of their bottles, it's like under 1 gram of residual sugar per serving of wine. So that's something big to look for. It's also going to make you feel better the next day because you're not obviously ingesting all the sugar and added chemicals and things that now on top of the ethanol, your liver has to filter through, right? If you're doing hard alcohol, then maybe it's just focusing more so on like what you're mixing that with. Generally with hard liquors, there's not, added sugar and things of that sort. But it's what you're combining it with that maybe is something we need to consider. And so you mentioned the digestive bitters, but a lot of times too, like if you're at a bar, I've done this so many times, especially if I'm not having any alcohol, I'll just go up to the bartender and ask for a sparkling water with bitters in it. They're almost always going to have bitters because they're used a lot in alcoholic beverages. So whether you're drinking alcohol or not, you could ask for bitters inside of your drink to get some of this. I mean, bitters honestly help stimulate bile flow, which is great for our liver too. So outside of just digestion, they're great for helping the liver detoxify. But even if you don't want to do an alcoholic drink and you just want to get some of those digestive benefits we talked about, just get a sparkling water and add those bitters into it. You honestly won't even taste it, but you're getting so many of those good digestive benefits.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to also diffuse some of those conversations at like an office Christmas party. Oh, why aren't you drinking? Whatnot? But it still looks like you have a beverage. Not that you have to defend yourself, right? But I find that it's a really helpful way to still feel like you're participating, even if that's after or before you have an alcoholic beverage. It's a nice way to get your digestive enzymes flowing, get your bile supported. Yeah, I love that option too.
Definitely. Okay, I know we talked a little bit about the circadian rhythm, but maybe you could just tell us, we talked a little bit about like the morning time and how we recommend structuring that morning time. Tell us a couple of things that we could pay attention to for the evening time to support our circadian rhythm.
Yeah, so light exposure first and foremost is going to be so important for helping regulate that circadian rhythm. In your previous episode, I love this metaphor of cortisol being like the sun and melatonin being like the moon. You want that melatonin production to increase in the evening just as the moon is rising, right? And then sustained production. We don't want to all of a sudden be increasing our melatonin and then be exposed to bright light and then that melatonin production essentially shuts off, right? We know that from research. So making sure that overhead lighting is dimmed, bright light exposure is minimized, screen time is minimized because we know that there's a lot of blue light that's emitted from there. Red light as opposed to blue is going to be really important for that melatonin production. So if you do have red light therapy or some type of red light lamp, I think Philips is the company that makes those light bulbs where you can adjust the type of light that's coming from it. So if you can even adjust the actual lighting in your home to make it more red as opposed to a cooler, bluer tone, that can be really helpful too. But there's so much power behind the type of light that we are exposed to in the evening time and how that can very directly impact our pineal gland, which is just behind our eyeballs. That's what's secreting melatonin. It has a very, very direct relationship to the light that we're being exposed to. So if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely everyone should listen to that episode. It's super interesting. But from the light exposure standpoint, very important to help regulate circadian rhythms. And then also just in terms of the activities that we're doing, maybe you're someone who likes to wind down watching TV, something along those lines. Can you have blue light blockers? So we're at least filtering out a portion of that blue light. Also paying attention to what kind of stimulation you're getting from your TV shows, from a book that you're reading. All of that can be really important as well, just so you're not perpetuating cortisol production. We just want to send any potential stimuli to our brain that it's time to rest. So whether that's from mental stimulation, from light exposure, etc. I've mentioned the importance of having a consistent sleep and wake time. That's super important as well. People might be familiar with the idea of social jet lag, which often happens on the weekends. It's kind of how we usually talk about the idea of social jet lag, but especially during the holidays, that can be tenfold. It's essentially the idea where you might not be changing time zones, but if your sleep patterns are severely disrupted, or maybe you're going to bed even just a couple hours later, that next morning you feel like you're actually jet lagged because that disruption in your circadian rhythm. So making sure that you're as consistent with your meal timing as well as with your sleep timing, super important for circadian rhythms, both from the front end of your day all the way through to the ending of your day.
Yeah, and something we're really focusing on in this year's holiday guide is travel specifically, and something that can be great if you are shifting time zones. Say you're even going from the Pacific, like you're living on the West Coast and you're going to be seeing family, in the central time zone, say in like Texas or something, that is a 2-hour time difference. And so you can take a couple milligrams of melatonin, and melatonin's great supplementally to be able to not only support our antioxidant production, but also to help to be able to shift these circadian rhythms. And if it is a really large time gap, and this is something that I like to use, you can use an app called like Time Shifter, and you can actually put in when your flights are, and it'll tell you when to start taking melatonin and the days prior to start shifting your circadian rhythm so that you don't deal with the effects of jet lag. It's a really cool app. I highly recommend it. The first time you use it is free, and then you have to pay after that. But I use it every time I travel, and really any time shift like more than 3 hours, I'd really recommend utilizing something like that. But anything, 3 hours or less, then just take melatonin an hour before you're trying to get to bed, and this can help to be able to shift that circadian rhythm. So yeah, that's a tip that you can use with you as part of travel.
Yeah, such a useful tool and resource. It'll tell you also when to caffeinate, how early to wake up, when to start shifting your waking time, because we can use it strategically, right? Normally we want to be consistent with it, but we can shift our sleep and wake time strategically. So yeah, Time Shifter is a great resource, especially during the holidays.
Definitely.
So, Lauren, let's talk too about managing time stress, because even though the holidays can be a very happy time, it's also where we probably have a lot more on our to-do list, trying to wrap things up before the end of the year, gift buying, gift wrapping, all of the things. So why don't you talk us through some strategies to help manage feeling like you have zero time in the day to really dedicate toward these health promoting habits and strategies?
Yeah, I think it's important that instead of overwhelming yourself with trying to do it all, that you're trying to find strategies of how you can do the best of it all, right? And maybe not be perfect in any of these areas, but find ways to make your life a little bit easier. So whatever is, going to be the most, supportive for you during this time of year is what you should lean in on. I'll give you some tips that I find have worked for myself and have worked for clients over the years. One of those is, instead of maybe taking the time each week to meal prep and grocery shop, maybe you utilize a meal prep service. We have our partnership with Metabolic Meals, and we have those inflammation harmony approved meals through there. And that's something we'll include the link below. But even if you're not an inflammation harmony participant, you can actually access those meals specifically. They're one of my favorite companies. They deliver to your doorstep in all US, states except for I think Hawaii and maybe Alaska. Don't quote me on that, but I want to say that that's their 48 continental states, and they all are grass-fed proteins and they're all blood sugar balanced and things of that sort. And so that can just be a really good option. I like to just have some in the freezer. And then that way, if I know, okay, I'm not going to eat it before it goes bad, but I want to just have something that like if I need a quick meal, I can pull from, that can be a really great option. You could also do something similar where maybe you just like make a big batch of chili and then you freeze some of it and you have that in the freezer. And then if you know that there's going to be a week where you're just not going to have the time to be able to get to the store and grocery shop and cook and all the things, then you have some options that are in the freezer to be able to work for you. Maybe it's also just trying to simplify things a little bit more. And something that I find during this time of year that's really helpful is like maybe instead of my normal daily snack where I'm like making a bowl of like all of these different components in it, I'm like, I'm just going to do a protein shake. Like I'm just going to do something super similar, something super simple, throw our Functional Fuel Pro into a shaker with like some coconut milk or something and have that for my snack. And that way I can just have it done in 20 seconds and then move on to the next thing that I need to do. So little strategies like that can go a really long way. It could also look like maybe reducing the amount of days that you are working out and really prioritizing the ones that are going to be the most impactful. So like say you're doing our Strength and Hormones workout program, we have 6 days of workouts per week, and you know this time of year you really want to maximize your insulin sensitivity. Well, just focus on the strength training days and then like walk outside of that, because you can walk with your kids if you have them or with your dogs. You can kill two birds with one stone. Maybe you can walk and take meetings at the same time, right? You're not actually having to dedicate 3 more days to doing your zone 2 workouts, but you're just prioritizing the strength training because you know that that's going to be the most impactful for you during this time of year. And that the walking, you can make that happen by doing other things at the same time. So those are just some simple tips that can go a really long way and taking some of that pressure off yourself. But I think it's really helpful to reevaluate on a week-to-week basis. Where are you feeling overwhelmed? Where are you feeling burnt out? And before you get to that state to where you're like absolutely burnt out, make some of these shifts prior so that you don't actually get to, a full burnout with like never wanting to eat a healthy food again because you're so burnt out on cooking.
Yeah. And we don't have to completely throw the towel in. It's not an all or nothing thing. You don't have to go either all 6 workouts a week or nothing, right? So I love the idea of being more proactive and just planning ahead, giving yourself a little bit more of that grace and actually planning that decrease in frequency. That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find this time of year that sometimes people are like, maybe it's not so much time, or maybe it is time as well, but it's more so the financial stress, right? Because that can put a lot of strain on you as well. And maybe that even makes it hard for you to do, like pick some of these time saving mechanisms. Because a lot of times if we want to save time, it costs us more money, right? So what are some tips that someone can explore and utilize during this time of year if they are feeling financial stress, but still want to make really good decisions for themselves, for their health?
Yeah, this is such an important conversation. And, one of the prime tips is just to return to the basics. Go back to the basics. You can build out your meals by focusing on a protein, a veggie, a starch. Maybe you can find like discount protein options too that might last you all week because it's a larger cut of meat that you can throw in the crock pot or something like that. Or a whole chicken, like you had mentioned. That provides so much protein for, depending on how many people you're cooking for, maybe it's at least a couple of days. If you're just cooking for yourself, maybe that's the whole week. So really relying on those whole protein options, discounted proteins, like I had mentioned, things that, maybe the shelf life is a little bit shorter, but if you're going to prep it immediately, then it doesn't matter, right? When it comes to the vegetable options, we can't deny the benefits of frozen vegetables, honestly. They're picked when they're fresh. They still have great nutritional value. They can oftentimes be a lot cheaper if you can't afford to eat seasonally. It's kind of hit or miss. I feel like sometimes more seasonal vegetables are cheaper because they're more available when they're in season. Other times grocery stores take advantage of that. So just whatever is most feasible to you. There's no wrong way to get your vegetables in, right? So those frozen options can be really helpful, especially if it feels like you're in a bind, especially if you're afraid of food waste around this time, if you're cooking for 1 person or 10 people. There's a website called savethefood.com that I really like. They have a guesstimator. So if you're under financial stress, preparing for a lot of people and want to make sure that you're not wasting food, that you're being resourceful. They have a lot of really great tools for that. So their guesstimator allows you to type in how many people you're cooking for, the types of foods that you're eating, and then it'll give you an idea of how much food you should actually be buying. They also have recipes, so you can plug in the foods that you do have on hand so that you can actually utilize those foods. So that's a really good resource that I find to be helpful for that.
I love that. Such great tips. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest or in California, I'll share with you guys my biggest secret. I know Ramona knows exactly what I'm going to say right now.
I'm so ready. So ready for it.
But my favorite store ever is Grocery Outlet. And don't be afraid. They honestly have so many great options. Like you can find Primal Kitchen, you can find organic poultry, grass-fed beef, all of the good stuff. So you just have to be ready. That's kind of like thrift store shopping. You're not going to be able to get your staples every single week, but that's kind of what makes it fun.
Go in with an open mind.
Go in with an open mind. But it's not like any of the food is rancid or bad or anything of that sort. It's just overstock. It's kind of like shopping at Marshall's. And that's one of the advantages, I guess, one of the few advantages we have of living on the West Coast is that we do have Grocery Outlets. So that's always a great tip if you're looking to save a little bit on groceries.
I do love Grocery Outlet. And if you find something you like, get a lot of it.
Stock up. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we have so many resources and more tips just like this inside of this year's free holiday guide. The link to access it is in the show notes below. It's just a very simple PDF guide that we've put together for you guys with all of these tools and cheat sheets and brand names and recipe swaps and so many good things. 100% free. We do this every year. It's kind of our thing because we want to support you guys. We want you to feel like you just feel like the holiday spirit and you don't feel that pressure and stress during this time of year. So we hope you guys love it. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, and we'll be back here shortly with another episode.